Well, the quality of the audio will suffer, and it will be your fault. Our car is back now. We have one fully functioning car once more.
Ooh. What was actually wrong with it in the end? I keep forgetting.
Well, so we were driving it back home. I won't be too specific about where because I might put this in the edit. So we were driving it back home, and the check engine light overheating thing on the dashboard started just flashing, and it's like, oh dear. So we had to pull over. We were on a dual carriageway, so sat in a lay-by with the hazards on, which is scary at night. Well, it's scary at day as well, but it's particularly scary at night. And there was no coolant in the engine whatsoever. It had all gone. This is meant to be a closed system. So we got recovered. We got taken back home. The guy that recovered us reckoned it was probably just like a split tube somewhere, and it would be cheap and quick to repair. Not so. So it had been.
The man was wrong.
The man was wrong. It had been serviced just 3 days prior to breaking down, and so I thought, well, I know who I'm pointing a finger at. So I took it back to where we got it serviced and said, it broke down the other day. No coolant in there. What have you done to it? And they had a look, and they were pretty adamant that they hadn't broken it because they hadn't touched anything in the coolant. But they did a bit more digging around and replaced one of the. What I learned about cars, right? So you got it's like they're water cooled engines, but the water doesn't continuously circulate. There's like a thermostat that will only let water circulate when it reaches a certain temperature, which seems bizarre to me. If someone can explain to me why that is, or if that's even true, and I might be led on by some mechanics here, but that is what seems to be the case, and I'm curious about why that is, and why there's not just constantly water circulating and variable fan speed for maintaining temperature. Anyway, so that they replaced that, thinking that had broken, it wasn't letting water circulate, and that didn't fix it. And then they were sort of saying, we've had one car like this before that we replaced more and more stuff on and never quite managed to get to the bottom of it. It's probably best if you take it to a Vauxhall garage, because we have a Vauxhall car. So
it'd be great if it wasn't a Vauxhall. They're just like, yeah, those guys are really good.
Yeah, they're just really good. So we had to take it to a Vauxhall garage, and that was a bit sketchy because it's sort of like driving a car without any coolant in it is a bad plan. If the engine overheats consistently, you're going to do a lot of damage to the engine. So that was a bit sketchy, but we did manage to get it to a Vauxhall garage, and they have fixed it, and they have fixed it by replacing basically the entire cooling system. So it was more expensive than I would have liked. I think we've spent about 700 quid on it this year for service and then this repair, which is upsetting.
And you can't pin it on the service.
I can't pin it all on the... No, it's sort of something else broke. I think we were just very unfortunate that... So what the Vauxhall garage was saying was that the radiator had a leak in it, which I'm kind of surprised the people at the other garage didn't spot, but there you go. And that the cooling pump wasn't working, so it wasn't circulating water. So they replaced basically all of that. They were going to replace the thing that the other garage replaced as well, until I said, well, that's literally been replaced 2 days ago. I think that's fine. So they didn't do that, thankfully, which saved us a little bit of money. But so that's that. So yeah, so basically the car would, like, you'd fill it with antifreeze or water or whatever, and it would work for a little bit, and then at some point all the water would just boil away quite violently, and then the engine would overheat because there was no coolant in it anymore. And it seems to be fixed. It's been driven around quite a lot in the last couple of days, and there's still coolant in the engine. But yeah, cars are ludicrously expensive to run.
They really are. I am not upset that I don't drive.
Yeah, they are expensive. You sort of naively think, oh, it's going to be the cost of buying the car, monthly repayments until you've bought it, and then just the running cost of insurance and petrol. But then it's like, well, actually no, there's things like this. There's the cost of servicing it, and then there's the occasional, the car's broken, please sink 600 quid into repairing it now.
Might as well just build robots instead.
Yeah, if you're going to sink money into something that's going to get broken, it may as well be a combat robot.
Ride to work on an ant weight. To be fair, we have seen that, like, beetle weights can push a heavyweight. A heavyweight weighs more than a person.
This is true.
So if a beetle weight can push one of those, it can push you. Plus, you have, like, an electric skateboard now. I don't see why you need a car at all.
Well, I mean, getting to work is a little bit out of the range of my skateboard.
Then work nearer to home.
I wish I could. I wish I could skateboard to work. That'd be great, but I can't.
That's such a... I don't know why, but that just seems like such a weird ambition to me, but one that I think you should fulfill.
Well, because it's just so much less hassle than driving. and it's good fun. I mean, electric skateboard is a lot of fun. So
I would probably argue that walking is probably easier than electric skateboarding.
no. I mean, there's like there's a learning curve on the electric skateboard, and then once you've crossed that, I can get around so much faster now than I could when I was walking.
But storage and charging isn't a thing you have to worry about with your own body. Well, it is a thing you have to worry about, but not specifically so you can walk around.
Well, storage in what sense? I mean, it just comes into the house with me. I mean, I guess I haven't yet
find a space
used it
for it.
I haven't. Well, yeah, but it just sits by the front door. That's not a big deal. And there's a plug by our front door, so I can just sort of like sit it next to the front door, plug it in, and it's fine.
Think of all the pollution, Sam.
This causes less pollution, I suspect, than most other things.
But not walking.
I don't know, man. Does carbon dioxide count as pollution?
Yes. That's
You
kind of
probably
most of what pollution is.
So you probably. Well, I'm just saying, like the natural carbon dioxide that you just breathe out is what I'm getting at, not like the big stuff.
It's part of your carbon footprint, yeah.
Yeah, but like, so I think the amount of electricity it uses is tiny, and I suspect I don't know. I'd be curious to know how much more CO2 you breathe out when you're walking as compared to when you're just stood on a moving platform.
I mean, you're still breathing.
You are still breathing, but you may be breathing more.
Even for me, as an unfit person, I feel like my respiration rate and heart rate does not significantly increase by walking.
Oh, but I bet it does increase though.
Not by enough to outweigh the pollution of generating electricity to run a skateboard.
Look, I would like to see some studies into this. I want some hard data.
We could gather the data on this. That is within our reach.
I think we should crowdsource it.
Crowdsourcing, otherwise known as make someone else do it.
Exactly.
You boring.
No, I'm having too much fun skateboarding to think about the environmental implications of it.
Oh, if I don't make some kind of Tony Hawk rip-off cover in the next week, I've failed.
Yep.
Oh, well, not only are you environmentally unfriendly, you were also wrong last episode.
That's
which,
not possible.
as we all know, is not allowed.
It's not allowed, but it's happened. What was I wrong about?
Valkyrie's bar and the failure of the bar.
Ah, yes. What went wrong then?
Well, according to Max on Twitter, it was a single piece of metal, as little old Ryan here did say. But apparently the issue that actually caused the break was that they'd welded some extra pieces onto it as support for the bar itself. The bar part was a single piece with some extra bits added, and by putting those areas through a heat cycle from welding, it weakened the metal. Now, I don't know nearly enough about how metal reacts to heat to know exactly what went wrong there, but I know that it does and that it's complicated and annoying.
That seems plausible to me. I'm going to protest me being outright wrong on this, though, because I did what I think I have to go back and listen to the tape about exactly what I said, but I mean, I think I said, like, that bar is not one piece. I think I was wrong about the way that it was built, but I was right about the fact that it's not one piece.
I realised that halfway through reading this message and just tried to gloss over it, hoping you wouldn't notice.
No, I've noticed, so not entirely wrong.
But as I tried to hastily sort of redirect myself and say, the bar part is a single piece. There is a single piece of metal that makes a straight line across that weapon, with some little extra bits added for reasons that I don't quite understand. I don't really see how they were helpful, or how they were meant to be helpful, because they were actively unhelpful.
Well, there we go. I mean, I think I was technically correct.
I mean, some of what you said was correct, but the overall gist of what you were saying was absolutely wrong.
It was true from a certain point of view, but yeah, no, I was wrong about which bits of it were not a single piece. But there you go. If you're making a big spinning weapon, machine it out of a single piece of metal and don't do anything else to it.
Or do what Ray does with one of his bars, where I think it's aluminium for the most part, but with some tool steel inserts on the end. Best of both worlds in properties terms.
That's Ray, then. That's like a different level.
No, this is one of the things that I really would like to learn a lot more about, and that is the different properties of the various different metals that are used. Because there seems to be so much nuance about, for example, choosing the correct alloy of aluminium for the properties you want. And the way you can then adapt those properties is absolutely fascinating to me.
Well, I think you've got a a lot of research into material sciences to do.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. There's way too much. Another thing, actually, something that really interested me, and this brings on to something I wanted to talk about, but watching the King of Bots Featherweight International Championship thing last weekend really highlighted to me just how effective plastics can be as an anti-spinner armour. It's something that I've always sort of known was true, but have never necessarily understood. And I think being able to watch at that scale, you really see the difference it makes. Where the massive vertical spinners that you have in the field, because of course you do, are launching everyone almost to the ceiling, and then suddenly they're coming up against something armoured in plastic and just taking small chips off of it. That's when you really see the advantages of that. And so the whole tournament itself was really interesting to watch. It's the first time I've really properly sat down and watched anything other than a heavyweight tournament. And there were some fantastic machines in there. I'm guessing you didn't watch any of it, I realise.
I was away. I've been away a lot recently, so I haven't had time to watch a lot of stuff.
Because otherwise, of course, you would have watched every second, wouldn't you?
I may have watched it. I probably would have done. I mean,
because I'd have made you.
I knew it was happening. I assumed that you would have eventually told me that it was good and worth watching, and then I would have watched it, which is what's going to happen. I will, if it's good, I will sit down and watch it. Just not in a timely fashion.
I will throw into the show notes a big playlist with all of the fights, but some things to really watch out for. Neon, that we know from King of Bots originally. Some spectacular fights. Straddle, which is Tom Brewster's featherweight version of Huge. Again, some very spectacular fights. Shrapnel as well, big vertical spinner, had some really good hits. Watch out for the complete annihilation of Orpheus as well, that was a particular highlight. So many good little moments, so many really good machines. And also really good to have the Chinese teams involved. There was a featherweight version of Jakku, which I particularly enjoyed watching. So yeah, lots of good stuff there.
Cool. So I think it's time then to move on to BattleBots. We have episode, 13 to talk about first. So the first fight in here is Red Devil versus Valkyrie.
Yeah, this is kind of the episode that we were really worried about having lots of short fights in. Mm-hmm. And this was not a short fight at all.
No, this was actually overall, I think, quite a good episode, despite the ridiculous lineup.
It could have been terrible, but it turned out to be excellent.
Yeah,
and this fight,
move.
I think, really... This is kind of the pick of the fights for me.
Yeah, that's fair, I think. I think I'd agree with that.
And it's interesting because the damage that Valkyrie did, I think, made Red Devil stronger.
How so?
You see, Red Devil comes in with the plough, and the plough is quite well set up for big horizontals. It seems reasonably well set up for verticals, although it hasn't had the best of time against them. What it really isn't set up for well is an undercutter, because it's got the angles on the sides, the sort of bottom of the sides are lifted up off the ground. So it's just inviting an undercutter directly under. But as soon as the tread pod was taken off and the wedge was mashed up a bit, that was actually then riding flush on the floor. And from that point onwards, Valkyrie really struggled to get hits in on anything other than the wedge.
Yeah, I think Valkyrie also struggled with turning left for a lot of that fight. So, I don't think it's entirely that Red Devil was, on the floor now.
I mean, Valkyrie has struggled with lots of things and has still looked really destructive.
Was it in this fight that they got a hit off the back of their weapon as well at some point, or was that a different one?
Potentially, yes. I mean, I feel like that probably happened just because they were struggling to go forward so much.
Yeah.
Valkyrie is reminding me why I love undercutters. And I think it's the fact it's a toothed disc that's making me enjoy watching it so much. Because we've had things like PP3D, which delivered big hits but couldn't take them itself. Whereas Valkyrie, because it's delivering less energy with every hit, it's a much more tenacious and controlled machine. And it sends a lot more sparks around, which always looks good.
Yeah, I love the design of that disc. I really like the multiple teeth. It's like just a big, very widely spaced tooth, circular saw almost. And I really like what it looks like. And yeah, I think I agree. It's the I guess the different behaviour in the way that it attacks and stuff has pros and cons. But I think it's it's a well balanced machine and it's a cool weapon for sure.
It's the kind of disc that someone who doesn't know much about robot combat would draw to put on a normal spinner. So give it lots of teeth. That makes it hit harder. But no, it's exactly that makes me like it. The fact it's not trying to deliver loads of energy.
Yeah.
Which again, with an undercutter in particular, makes a lot of sense because you're already hitting softer parts of a robot.
Yeah, you don't need a lot of energy to rip the tyres off a robot's wheels, do you?
Yeah, or in this case, the whole drive system.
Or indeed an entire drive pod.
Now, there's two things about this. First things first, before the season aired, a couple of teams did tease the fact that we would see a robot get split in two this season. So far, we've seen 3. Now, I'm sure they were talking about Vanquish, that was properly in half, but with this and Gigabyte as well, this is some of the best destruction we've seen. And we also saw the same happen to Red Devil's sort of King of Bots cousin. It died in basically the exact same way.
Yeah, this is an example of like what a true cluster bot is.
Yes, the unintentional kind.
But like it really is though, because I mean, this is at least 2, and I presume 3 separate systems all working together, isn't it?
Yes.
So it is, if you separate them out, it almost is 3 robots working together to form one bigger, better robot, which is really cool, and it's amazing to see so much redundancy between them all. And I'd love to know how all that works, like just technically how they control. I mean, how many control? I assume they have like 1 or 2 controllers to control it. I'd just love to know how all that works in a bit more detail. It's very cool.
So the drive is, I believe, really simple in terms of a control point of view, in that you just bind the 2 separate receivers and do signal mixing, I would imagine, on the transmitter. Or it might even be done tank style.
Yeah, I didn't know that you could bind. I sort of just assumed that you could not bind 2 receivers to the same transmitter, but I guess it makes sense.
Yeah, you can bind as many as you want, I think.
That would... If it was just transmission from the transmitter to the receiver, that would make sense. But I mean, I assume because you can get like some things that will feed back as well, can't you? That will like feed information about what other sensors back to the transmitter. So it's like a 2-way thing. And I guess in the case of a 2-way thing, I think unlimited.
That seems like an edge case to me.
Yeah, unlimited binding in that case seems a bit less likely to me. But yeah, I mean, unlimited binding if in just a pure TX case makes sense. I think it's broadcasting what you're doing and just have 2 or 3 things tuned into the same thing. And I guess each one just listens to the signals that it cares about.
Yeah, and again, it might be that there's specific hardware you can do this on, specific hardware you can't. I think the context that I learned that in was Blue at King of Bots, where they said that they were having trouble with receivers breaking, so they just bound 2 receivers to every whatever it was they were controlling. So I think they had separate receivers per motor, potentially. Or, well, per ESC at least.
Interesting. I wonder why that is as well then.
That was just for redundancy, I think.
Yeah, but if the initial... Is it just purely redundancy to have 1 receiver on each ESC, or is it that's just what they ended up doing to make it work, but ideally they wouldn't?
I think it was just an on-the-fly solution to a problem. Yeah. This was something I read a long time ago now. This is very much back of the memory.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and then I believe that in the specific case of Red Devil, they do have a separate controller for weaponry, but I think that's as much to do with the complexity of driving it as anything else. I think that's just, you want 2 drivers.
Yeah, I think the logistics of that robot design do warrant at least 2 people controlling it.
So the other thing that I noticed that I'm not actually angry about, I think this kind of makes sense from a TV point of view, but I feel like there was some very significant foreshadowing at the start of the fight when Kenny went out of his way to explain that each drive pod is independently powered and controlled.
There was a lot of foreshadowing in this episode in general, I think. But yeah, I particularly noticed it in this fight as well.
And it's one of those things where I'm not angry about it because I didn't notice it at the time. I noticed it on a rewatching. And I think it does make sense in terms of making sure that every viewer has a chance to be up to speed with what's happening. Because otherwise, they've got to explain that in the middle of the fight once that drive pod has come off.
Yeah, I don't know. It kind of breaks the illusion that all that the commentary is done at the same time as the fight. I guess that some of it is, and they mix in some stuff from afterwards as well, in this case. But
that is the inherent advantage of voiceover, isn't it?
Yeah. I have mixed feelings about it because I did notice it on the first viewing. I did sort of think, and that because they said it as like, is this going to get split in 2 then or something? It did sort of like.
Did they go that far?
No, I'm not saying they said it would get split in 2. I'm just saying if they're pointing out that it's independently, each thing is independently powered and controlled, then I'm going, does that mean they're going to get split in half?
Oh, that makes more sense.
Yeah, I don't think they didn't go that far.
Actually, there's a third thing that this fight brings up for me, which is something that I mentioned last episode, where I was saying how I would love to see more ex-Roboteers, or current Roboteers, on the judging panel. And who do we have? Lisa Winter.
Yeah.
From...
Ooh, Tentamushi or something?
Oh, man, that's annoying. I hate that you knew that.
Suck it!
And more famously, of course, Plan X. A robot with a model brain for no reason.
I didn't know that one.
Didn't they lose to Rex of all robots?
I don't know.
Or they at least struggled. That's my memory of how things went down anyway.
Well, I'll believe you.
A very easy decision for the judges, this one. Not particularly contentious, was it?
No, I think Valkyrie did all the damage.
Had all the control and aggression.
I mean, Red Devil did do very well to survive as long as it did. I'm amazed by robots' abilities to continue to drive despite half of their drive system missing. But yeah, Valkyrie win, obviously.
Excellent. And that takes us on to Brutus versus Gigabyte. The classic matchup of vertical versus horizontal spinner, which did not end.
I think you mean vertical versus wedge.
I mean, you could argue it's horizontal versus wedge. Seeing as for most of the fight they weren't running the weapon.
This is true. But it's much more funny to imply that Gigabyte is a wedge.
I mean, it would meet my definition, I feel. It's also almost got my ideal wedge of truncated sphere going on.
Is that an ideal wedge? Do you mean truncated sphere or do you mean truncated something else?
I mean truncated sphere is the perfect wedge.
Oh, from the other way. Okay.
But
I had, if you imagine, you got the front of a robot, I imagined like having like a convex thing on the front of it, so it's steeper towards the bottom, and I'm assuming what you mean is a concave thing where it's shallower towards the bottom. And for some reason, it took me a little while for my brain to make that switch.
No, what I mean is get a ball, cut the top off of it, and put that on the floor.
How can you possibly call that a wedge?
It's an inclined plane of sorts.
How can... It's literally perpendicular to the floor where it meets it.
No, you're thinking of a hemisphere. You're cutting it off at the equator of the ball. I'm saying just slice the top off. Just take the very top off. Like turning a plate upside down, but smoother.
I see what you mean. I mean, that's more wedge-like. I'm still not convinced I'd call that a wedge. Because it's curved.
It's prime wedge.
Okay, if you say so. I mean, I agree that would be an effective shape for a robot.
Effective shape for a wedge.
God, what have I started?
I did not prepare to defend this position.
I can tell.
For now, provisionally, it's a wedge. I may amend that later. What on earth are we talking about again? Ah, yes, Brutus versus Gigabyte. Some very interesting strategy from Brutus here.
It's a very brave strategy, isn't it, to not use your weapon, assuming it is strategy, and I guess it must be given how effective it was. Well, given the fact that it span up properly towards the end, I assume it must have been strategy, but...
They did leave it quite a while after the Gigabyte weapon had stopped. But that might just be in the edit.
Yeah, it's hard to know, but if it is strategy, that's a bold strategy, because if it does go to the judges, you've gone the whole fight without using your active weapon and you're screwed.
I imagine they would have got it going at some point either way if they felt it was looking like going to the judges. I just don't understand this strategy at all. I don't understand the benefit of it.
I think it's reasonable to judge that Gigabyte's weapon will stop working at some point. And I think it's reasonable to say that if you've got a well-built wedge, which I think Brutus is, that you'll be able to take more hits than Gigabyte can deliver before it breaks, especially if they can, because they did the box rushing at the beginning, and they started off doing a reasonably good job of keeping Gigabyte like in corners and towards the edges of the thing. They did that less well throughout a lot of the fight, but like, you know, if you could consistently do that, I can see the line of reasoning, but I think they were a bit too laid back with when they fired their weapon up.
Thing is, you can do all of those things with your weapon running, with the added potential to get a big hit on them that damages them sooner. You know, not running that weapon doesn't insulate the weapon from damage. I'm guessing it's just based purely on them not having confidence in their weapon to run for more than a few hits.
Maybe that's part of it as well, but I'd also think if you've got these two high energy things hitting, there's more, when you do that, there's more energy involved, and that energy's got to go somewhere. And so it's sort of like, I don't know. I just think it makes sense to try and minimise how much energy is in those blows at the beginning. But I see what you mean, that obviously,
But any hit that weapon takes is going to come from the side anyway. So whether or not it's spinning at the time, to me, doesn't seem to make a difference. I could be completely off-piste here. I could be missing something huge. But to me, it seems like the hits it takes are going to hurt just as much whether it's spinning at the time or not.
I think I agree with you, but just to continue to try and defend the other point of view for the sake of it, I think the other thing, well, I'm not doubling down because I agree with you, but the other disadvantage, I guess, to having your weapon spinning is what eventually did undo Brutus, which is the gyroscopic effects of having it going.
True.
And I guess when your weapon's spinning, you get hit by a gigabyte, your robot then spins around its vertical axis, which is exactly this axis you don't want to be spinning around with a vertical weapon going. So it would you'd get a lot of torque generated in other ways, and you're probably more likely to get flipped. So I wonder if that's what they were trying to avoid, maybe.
And then jam the weapon into the ground as well.
Yeah.
That is a very good point.
And then, so if they can do that and remain the right way up and wait until Gigabyte's weapon stops working and then spin their thing up and go, that may have been the strategy.
And I guess it also means that you're more able to stay faced up with the wedge if you've got full control over your turning.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, you've convinced me. Fair play. It's funny because I did have a note about the gyro being most of what actually took them over as well.
Yeah, that is definitely the thing that undid them, which is a shame. It was a really unfortunate loss for Brutus, really, because they did, again, on the assumption that was a tactic, and I'm fairly sure it was, that's an interesting tactic, and I'm glad it sort of mostly paid off for them. It's just unfortunate that there was just a very unlucky kind of thing, I guess, that happened at the end there.
The only thing I'll say to sort of slightly go against the idea of this being a lucky win for Gigabyte is that it was damage they had done earlier that stopped Brutus driving effectively inverted.
Yeah, that's true.
Because they had taken off one of the bunny ears.
Yeah.
So in that respect, you can kind of give a little bit more of the credit to Gigabyte, but not a huge amount.
Well, it was a well thought thing overall. I mean, it was in many ways, a close fight. Yeah, just the way it goes sometimes.
And Brutus really, I think, now has a record that is far worse than it deserves.
Yeah, what is its how many is it lost now?
So it lost to Red Devil because their weapon basically went up in smoke immediately.
Yeah.
They beat Son of Waiachi, and now they've lost to Gigabyte. They just about beat Warhawk, didn't they? So they're 2-2.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not that I'm that upset at the concept of another vertical not making the top 16.
Yeah, I'm not sure we need any more. I mean, Brutus is a reasonably good machine, but I think with the exception of the Red Devil one, I think most of it makes sense. I mean, the Red Devil thing's just unfortunate because I think Brutus should have won that had their weapon been working properly. Although I say that, but Red Devil did a very good job in general in that fight. I don't know, maybe. I think their record seems about right.
I'd say that if you break down in that way, you deserve to lose.
Yeah.
Whereas this realistically should have been their win.
Yeah, they were robbed a little bit in this fight, really.
But kind of robbed by themselves. Anything more on that one?
Nope, don't think so.
We'll move on to, and I don't think we'll be here very long, Bombshell Bite Force. A fight that happened.
It is a fight that happened. It was a short fight. Shockingly, Bombshell lost again.
Unheard of.
Who would have seen that coming? I think they could probably have lost a bit faster had Bite Force not been so insistent on trying to get them out of the arena. But I'm glad Bite Force were insistent on trying to get. Yeah, exactly. Why not? I think Bite Force would have won no matter what they did. They were sort of like. There was definitely sort of a moment where it's like, well, you flipped Bombshell. We've seen that Bombshell can't do anything from that position, so you may as well leave it, and they get counted out, and you've won, and it's easy. So it was sort of a bit of me going, you probably shouldn't be kicking them anymore because they might get the right way up, and then you might lose it. But actually, I think Bite Force was going to win this no matter what. And we got it's always interesting to see robots flipped out in BattleBots. I think, especially by a not.
It's rare enough anyway, so to have it done by a spinner is even better.
Yeah.
And, Bite Force didn't really have anything to prove, but it just seems to be going out and doing it anyway. I'll point out, I'm still not a huge fan of this version of Bite Force. Any robot that goes from interesting lifter/control design to vertical spinner has got a bit of work to do for me to love it, but you can't argue that it's not effective.
It's almost especially egregious that it is effective, isn't it? It's sort of like you've had an interesting robot, you've gone to a more boring one, and it's more effective, which is annoying.
I mean, he did He did win BattleBots with the old design, to be fair.
Yeah, but like, I don't know.
Not
I
by
know what you mean.
dominating fights like this version is, but he did win BattleBots with it.
This is true. This is true.
So I don't think we could yet call this technically more effective.
No, that's fair enough. I'm sorry. I apologise to the world for making such bold claims.
It is also the robot that he wanted to enter for the first season, but was basically told, yeah, we've already got a lot of verticals. So he went away, built something else. One, had a guaranteed place to go back to, right, I'll build what I want now. So that I do respect.
Yeah.
Do we have to move on?
Well, I mean, we've got to cover it at some point, haven't we?
Everyone knows it happened. We could get away without talking about it.
Son of Waiachi beat Endgame very quickly. Main event.
No. I need to defend Endgame. If we're mentioning it, I'm defending Endgame.
Okay.
That was about as close to a double knockout as you're going to get. Son of Waiachi just managed to twitch a little bit more afterwards. Right, main event, let's move on.
Okay, we have Blacksmith versus, oh man, Minotaur.
Minotaur? The bull from Brazil.
I have to think about what I was going to say there.
So, interesting that they've set us up with a rematch. This is the first time they've done it for a main event this season. And I feel like they gave themselves quite a task if they wanted this to live up to the original.
Yes. Now, before we get to that, I just want to talk a little bit about the intro for this fight because they obviously don't shy away from the fact that this is a rematch. They're like, this is the most viewed thing online, right? And then the graphics for like all the comments and stuff.
Oh no.
Are just terrible. Like the cheapness of the graphics everywhere else, I think with the exception of the thing that we mentioned before where certain things are in italics for the like stat sheets.
Oh.
That's a bit bad. But this takes it to a whole new level of just bad. This is like almost Microsoft Word level design.
You see, this is the point at which I've started to wonder if they're doing it on purpose.
Are they
Because
trying to be
something
cool?
that I often have. So I do the tiniest bit of graphic design. And I find that the danger for me as someone who's not particularly skilled is that if you try to do something good and fail, it looks more amateurish than just doing something that is an amateurish idea and doing it decently. And I feel like where this has had a very short production life, I wonder if they just went, yeah, let's not aim too high in case it looks like we've tried and failed. Instead, let's just not really try. Because that's what that graphic said to me.
Yeah, maybe that is what's happened.
And I think it's quite easy to reach a point where that becomes a style, and I think we're maybe there. Where it's like, yeah, some of the graphics are terrible, but that's kind of just part of what it is and could almost become charming very soon.
No, I think I've been fine with the way the graphics look for basically everything else. Even the stats thing is fine. It's passable and it's all right because it's just like clearly low budget and done quickly. And that's all right. I don't object to that. But this is because of what you've just said, it almost seems intentionally bad and that doesn't fit for me. I think they didn't need to even do this graphic, you know, if it was sort of like, if you can't do that in a way that, you know, if you've got nothing nice to say, don't say anything. If it's not like, if you can't do it properly, then not even properly, if you can't do it in a way that looks, you know, decent or reasonable, then, you know, maybe reevaluate how necessary it is to put presumably fake comments on top of that thing. I don't know. It seemed odd.
You see, I think the stats things are worse because they're on screen longer. And also, the stats thing, it's like, you're going to reuse this for multiple robots. Why don't you make it better? Whereas this, as a one-off thing that's on screen for 10 seconds, to me, makes more sense to half-arse.
Well, they've half-arsed it. I noticed. I don't approve. Sort yourself out, BattleBots production.
Maybe next year they'll try and up the production value of the graphics.
Maybe.
Actually,
Maybe
the
they'll hire
one
you
part
to do
of
it.
that graphic that did annoy me was the way they put the count up to like 100 million and a couple of hundred.
Why did that bother
That
you?
annoyed me. I don't know, because it's like saying, hey, it got over 100 million views. Just. That's basically what they're trying to say. It's like, I don't know where they've got that figure from anyway, because last I saw, before that video became unavailable, it was up at like 60. I don't know if they're counting Facebook views here. I feel like Facebook views might be a thing.
Yeah, well, Facebook views are ridiculously inflated.
Although that said, that fight for a very long time, and I think this is why it got viewed so often, that was the fight that I would show people to show them what robot combat is. But I stopped using it for the very simple reason that I think watching that video, it's very hard to understand what Minotaur's weapon does. And because they've got the flashy blue LEDs on the front, I've had at least 3 people go, oh, has that got like a taser on it? Like, no, that's not what that is. But, you know, to someone who's just watching that, they don't even realise that that thing is spinning. It just looks like they touch stuff and sparks fly and there's a blue flash.
That's so cartoony, isn't it, that a taser would make something jump that high?
Maybe they played Arenas of Destruction, where touching something with a flamethrower made all the armour fly off.
Just shatter, yeah. Oh, man. That's great.
So what I now need, and I still haven't worked out what I want this to be, is a go-to video to show people what this is all about. Because what you want...
Son of Boyarchi versus Endgame.
This podcast is over. But no, what you want is a fight between 2 robots where it's very obvious what they do.
Yeah.
So something like Beta Tombstone, I suppose, would be quite a good one.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't really show off the power of Tombstone very well because it's one of the robots that stood up to it. And you could go for like an absolute evisceration like Ice Wave Vanquish. But Ice Wave looks stupid, so I kind of don't want that to be someone's first experience. And it's a really hard thing to work out what you want that to be.
Yeah, I don't know. That's tricky.
I think we know what your outro can be now. You can tweet us the best fight to show someone new to robot combat. Might actually happen this time.
Yeah, people might actually tweet us.
No. Let's not get carried away here, Sam. Come on. Back to the fight, though. I think Blacksmith, to me, has always been the kind of machine that will last against Minotaur. And having the forks on there in particular gave me confidence that this would go the distance.
Those forks were almost unbelievably effective in the end, actually. I sort of, when I first saw them, I thought, that's probably quite a good idea. And then they proved themselves again and again and again. They were such a great addition.
It just makes so much sense. And what I love, it's the little bit on the top of the forks that makes them work. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Particularly against a design like Minotaur. It's like, no, you are not touching the main part of this robot.
It just occurred to me that because of those things on top of the forks, and they're hinged, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Minotaur's drum is spinning, will hit that upwards, which will bring the forks up and then flip Minotaur away.
That basically happened in this fight. Where it went straight up the forks. I don't know if it's the forks lifting up throwing it, or if it's more the fact that it's hitting what at that point is basically an immovable object and reacting back off of it. I think it's probably the latter. But it was still a spectacular
I think it's a bit
hit.
of both. I think the fact that they got... I would imagine the forks lifted them a little bit, which would send them a bit further. But yeah, that's quite funny.
And this whole fight, of
Here,
course,
we
was
have a
Minotaur
flipper powered by our opponent's weapon.
We never considered that one, did we?
Do it against a robot with a hammer, right? It's got a big button on the top.
This is Seesaw
right,
Bot.
okay. Right, you have a robot. It's shaped a bit like Gigabyte, right? And when you push the middle down, the skirt flips in all directions. And so unless your robot's got a really long reach on its hammer, they have to get quite close to you. They're on the skirt, they hit you, and then they get flipped away.
Build it. Build it. You see, what I'm now imagining, and this might be a really niche reference, you will have to be the judge, it's like the first stage of a Screwball Scramble course, but in robot form.
Is that?
It's niche, isn't it? Google it. Screwball Scramble.
It's too niche. Well, too niche for me.
You must have had one of these. If not, you failed at childhood.
I don't know.
I'm just making you Google stuff, that's all it is. Making you use the computer.
One of those.
One of those. Still
One
in
of
production, I believe,
those.
as well.
What is the first bit on that? Is it the
It's the wobbly bridge.
wobbly bridge? Yeah.
This will be in the show notes if this makes an edit, just to be very clear. This is my attempt at relatable content for 90s kids.
That's not even something that I would ever have thought even had a name.
Of course it had a name. It's a brand name product.
I know, but like, well,
The premier toy of 1996, I'm sure.
it's some weird toy.
I mean, the fact that I could Google it and immediately find what I wanted says that it's big, you know? It's still called Screwball Scramble as well. It hasn't even been rebranded. That's beautiful.
It's so big that I can search it on DuckDuckGo and find it as well.
Wow. I bet you'd even get it on Bing.
That's, I don't know, that's less likely.
Pushing it, I know, but...
You'd get the pornographic versions of this.
Oh, I'm looking at so many parts of it that would work for that as well. That's the worst thing.
I mean, what is it? Rule 34? I'm sure it exists.
Ctrl+Shift+N. Let's find out. That's not happening. Let's carry on with the recording.
I think let's not go down that path.
That's a little activity for the reader. That one.
Yeah, left in an exercise for the reader. That always annoyed me. I would like occasionally read like maths books when I was a bit younger, just like recreational maths books.
Nerd.
And there would be problems in there that were exercises left for the reader, and they didn't even have the solutions in their back. It was infuriating. Anyway, I don't know if my sound's died or you gone.
No, I'm just letting that all sink in.
You're just thinking that I read recreational maths books.
Read. Doing it as an adult, not weird. Doing it as a kid, a little bit weird. Although I, as an adult, have read recreational maths books for children, which I think is the perfect approach.
That's the way to do it.
What on earth were we talking about? How did we get onto this?
I blame you. I think one of the books I had, though, that I read was basically like a collection of columns written in some like magazine thing, complete with like like people had written in with questions it would answer and stuff. Oh man, massive nerd. We should move on.
We really should. I suppose we should talk about Minotaur's slightly less effective drum as well. Kind of recognising the driving skill of Al Kildall by toning down the drum.
Mm-hmm.
And it really showed in the cagey start we had to this fight.
It was such a slow start, wasn't it?
Yeah, Minotaur just not wanting to attack that front, knowing that it wouldn't work. Have forks gone too far? Are they ruining the sport? This fork-based meta needs to end.
Yeah, I don't know. It was a slow start. I was worried that it was going to be a slow fight. And it's I think on my first viewing, I sort of felt like it was a bit underwhelming, I guess, because it was sort of like so directly compared to their first fight. But on rewatching it, I think, it's not overall, it's reasonably well paced. It definitely picks up the pace towards the end. It would be nice if it was the pace at the end for the whole time, though. But I don't know if it would have lasted 3 minutes in that case or not.
I think the fact it was a rematch really affected the strategy. I think Al knew that he had to drive defensively. He wasn't going to go in and score a knockout. That hammer is not designed for knockouts. It is designed for show, for impressing judges. And I think in a sense of control as well, in that it's not going to buck your own robot up by firing it. So it can go for those repeated hits. It's kind of dead blowy in that style. But because the robot is so well upgraded and the opponents knew it, they weren't being aggressive either. And it was kind of who's going to blink first and do something interesting. And to be honest, even when Minotaur got on the attack, they couldn't really do that much. I have no idea what Blacksmith is made of, but it is tough stuff, especially that weird little web they've got on the front.
Yeah, Minotaur just never got a bite, did they? They did a lot of like generating sparks off the sides of Blacksmith, but not a lot else.
Which is weird because with the drum turned down, you'd expect them to be able to get a bite slightly better. There wouldn't be as much power behind it, but they're more likely to actually get a good full tooth contact because they're going to get better engagement.
Unless they turned it down to the point where the tooth couldn't actually dig into the metal anymore.
I feel like that's probably not a point that they would reach.
Yeah, I don't know. It's the only thought I have, though.
Again, if nothing else, they're going to catch the bottom edge of the robot and lift it up.
They never did, though. I don't think Minotaur's feeder wedge thing is far enough ahead of it for that to be effective.
They went underneath at one point and threw a few sparks off the underside, but that was about it.
Oh, yeah, that's true, yeah. Yeah, well, there you go.
And when Blacksmith did get on the offensive, actually landing some good hits, the one thing that I think maybe counted against them slightly was the fact that they were on fire for a few seconds.
They were on fire for a few seconds, and I think the last like 15 to 20 seconds or so, they were kind of just both robots flailing a little bit. There was much less control. They were just sort of like, fire, 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 just in case we hit it.
Which was a big upgrade on the first 30 seconds.
Yeah, I remember them making up for it. It's like, oh man, we were contracted for a certain number of hammer throws and we've not done it. Quick, got to make our money.
What do you make of the decision being unanimous?
I don't know, not really thought about it.
Is it what you were expecting? Does it look like a unanimous fight to you?
I didn't object to it at the time. I'm sure you're about to convince me that I should have objected to it though.
No, I'm not actually. I'm struggling with this fight because everything tells me that it is completely Minotaur's fight. But if I go and try to score it, Blacksmith still comes out reasonably well. So I'm completely happy with the result. I wouldn't have been upset if it was split at all. I'm completely okay with the result, but I can't get to it in a way that makes me happy.
Don't overthink it.
Yeah, we've passed that point. We passed that point on the Saturday morning afterwards. But yeah, it was a good episode's worth of judging. I can't complain. Yet. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun when we get there.
Okay.
On to episode 14.
Let's do it, yeah. We start with...
Well, we start with the cold open that we've been waiting for ever since the BattleBots Twitter, I think, accidentally released it.
What was the cold open in this one? I haven't got a note for what
Bronco
it was.
flipping Gamma 9 into the skip.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, that came out a long time ago, and I'm fairly sure they didn't mean to.
Well, do you feel like are you happy you've seen it now in the real world?
I'm delighted. It's really made my 2018. I was on tenterhooks, waiting to see the full context of the cold open.
Was there any more context in this than there was in whatever was released before?
I don't recall.
Let's move on. The first fight, in a shocking turn of events, not a main event, is Duck versus Tombstone.
I mean, it's a great fight card. We've got a spinner-free main event. We've got some good international representation. And then you've got Tombstone versus Duck as the first fight. I cannot tell you how nervous I got in the build-up to this match. I'd rested so much on this being a great fight. I feel like it became part of my personality to be looking forward to this fight.
Did it live up to your hopes and dreams and expectations?
Yes and no. Yes, in terms of outcome, no in terms of the way it got there. Because what I wanted to see was that plough just deflecting everything. And that's kind of the opposite of what we got.
I mean, it got broken on the first hit, didn't it?
Oh, it did. It got snapped. It snapped the end off clean.
Yeah.
Just how? That's mad.
Just, a little flick and it was gone.
Yeah, didn't even upset Tombstone really, did it? Just absolute madness. This is a less durable plough than Whoops had at Robo Games. But bear in mind that plough stood up to everything and more, and this one has just been treated like a biscuit. Absolute madness.
I'm assuming that the one that Whoops had wasn't articulated.
It was hinged rather than actively articulated. Because, of course, the whole idea of that plough is that it's going to deflect a horizontal upwards. And what it ended up doing quite well was using the middle just purely as a shield, which was effective, but not as fun to watch. Because what you want to see is Tombstone flying up in the air after every hit.
That would have been more entertaining, yeah.
But of course, we still very nearly got the shock result that we all expected, which at that point doesn't make it a shock.
The shocking expected outcome.
Shockingly predictable.
I think one of the interesting things in this fight was how Tombstone just kept going underneath Duck. Like, I think its bar was so low that it was never actually... It was more of an undercutter in many ways than anything else. It never seemed to get like a big full side on whack,
Yeah, this is the bar that we see used in a lot of fights. I think it was used against Minotaur as well, where I think it is used quite intentionally to kind of undercut, which is probably why it did so well against the ends of that plough. And I'm guessing it does that so well because it's got that kind of, I was going to say parallelogram, that's not what I want, that sort of trapezoid shape, hasn't it?
Trapezoid?
That's what, okay, trapezium if you prefer, but trapezoid I believe is the correct term in some places.
I'm trying to think, I would have said trapezoid.
Well, you can say what you want. This
Yes,
podcast
that
is about
shape.
a lot of things. Let's not make it about four-sided shapes.
But quadrangles are great.
I'm sure that's true. But yeah, because of that, it does seem to do a good job of getting under, whereas The other bars are very much about that sort of blunt force. Oh dear. That does make it really good at getting under, whereas those other bars are very much sort of bludgeoning in more of a blunt force trauma, hammer blow kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was an interesting choice. I think I would have gone with a slightly higher bar personally, just to make sure I was sort of whacking them. But there you go.
But again, then you're probably going to get thrown up off the ends of that plough. I feel like
Yeah.
Ray probably knows what he's doing.
I suspect he does. He's probably got slight idea.
I also wonder if the shorter bar makes it less likely to flip itself if it does hit an angle like that. Because if it gets off balance and the bar hits the floor, it's going to be doing it nearer to the sort of centre of rotation, as it were.
Yeah, it's got less leverage,
less moment, I suppose, yeah.
Less moment, yeah, if you want to be fancy and technical about it.
I was trying to avoid using the term moment. I thought I'd better just jump in there, because what I'm saying right now doesn't make sense. It's probably a small consideration, but maybe a worthwhile one.
Yeah, I'm not sure it would make a huge amount of difference, to be honest.
No, it is the only thing that won Tombstone this fight.
This was kind of like a bit of a tense fight, because there was a point near the beginning where it was sort of like, because I think Duck lost its drive on the front right at some point quite early on.
Yeah, that wheel got hit and kind of bound up the whole drive, didn't it? It was solved once that wheel came off fully.
Yeah, so that was jammed up, and at that point I wrote a note being like, well, Tombstone has basically won. And then a little bit later on, Tombstone stops working. It's immobile, and then Duck does the impossible and somehow drives in what seems to be a very straight line with wheels only on the left. It had no wheels on the right at this point, and it still just drove off completely out of its circumference while Tombstone was immobile. And it was like, oh wow, okay, Duck have won. And then
the funny thing there is that when Tombstone stopped, Duck still had 3 wheels. And Hal kind of suicidally drove into the still spinning bar of, at that point, a dead Tombstone and lost 2 of them. One of them, at least, though, was the one that was holding the drive up. So that was something.
Yeah. But I think as I sort of said earlier about Red Devil, I'm just amazed at how these robots seem to be capable of driving in remarkably straight lines despite missing at least half of their drive. It's just crazy.
Were you at all annoyed by the amount of time that Tombstone was stationary without being counted out?
I was, and then I reminded myself that it's kind of, because you have mentioned a few times, it's like a 20-second count, only the last 10 seconds of which is sort of done publicly.
Mm.
And so it was sort of like, are we just sort of seeing a lot of the first 10 seconds of it that's normally cut, but is not cut this time for tension reasons? I don't know.
Yep, there was some definite up the drama editing going on. Because they made what was not 20 seconds seem like about 30. They did a very good job of cutting away to everything imaginable to make that seem so much longer than it clearly was.
Lots of cuts to the ref being like, you got to show me some movement. I've got to see some movement. Can you show me some movement? Can you move the robot? I've got to see some movement. I'm going to count you out. Is there any movement?
Translational or transitional, though. It's an important distinction.
It's got to be transitional.
All the way. All the way.
Yeah. Transition your robot, Ray. Transition it. Transition it now. Otherwise I'm going to count you out.
And we had a nice little oh no from Justin as well, which I think is the first thing he's actually been allowed to say on BattleBots. He is otherwise silent.
Silent other than oh no. I mean, I think it's a warranted oh no in this case.
Oh yeah. Again, it's one of those moments where you realise how beat up Tombstone is. We saw, even from the shots at the beginning when it was sat in its square, that a lot of those top panels aren't quite sitting right. So we're looking a little bit twisted and a little bit bent, and as it's sat there stationary, you can really see how off-kilter the weapon is.
Yeah.
And it was only when the weapon span itself down a bit that they seemed to be able to drive again, which makes me wonder if they've just got some major vibration issues going on.
Well, whenever someone does finally break Tombstone, then I guess there'll be a long line of people like, yeah, well, I helped, I made it, I weakened it. You know when you got like that, the jar opening thing, right, where you sort of try to open a jar and then you give it to someone else and be like, oh yeah, well, I loosened it. Duck loosened Tombstone for everyone else.
Anything else on that fight? I feel like we could do a whole podcast on that fight, but we have to move on.
I think we're done.
On to Petunia versus Yeti. Possibly the best opportunity yet to see Petunia get some nice big crushes in on a really soft opponent.
So disappointing. So disappointing.
I mean, that big tip lasted seconds.
I think the opening move of this of this fight kind of sums the whole thing up, where Yeti tried to box rush and missed. Not Yeti, sorry, where Petunia tried to box rush and missed.
Yeah, there was a lot of attention paid to the walls during this fight. I mean, it was poor driving, repeatedly driving into walls. It was also poor driving to just immediately get the beak damaged by running it straight into the weapon. There was no attempt to outmaneuver an opponent here. It was just, yeah, let's just run in. Let's just have them. I don't know why I decided they're Londoners. But it's better than me trying to do a Dutch accent. That'd be insensitive.
I mean, I'm not sure the London one is much better, to be honest.
I mean...
But you've done it now. It's there.
I had to spend time with people from London recently. It's entirely accurate, I feel. I'm sure they'd be fine with it.
Utterly flawless.
Yeah, this is true domination from Yeti. This is exactly what we expect to see Yeti do. Just hit things hard and keep on hitting them.
Yeah, this was just, a perfect fight for Yeti, really.
Although, if you play it in reverse, what happens is that two robots start a battle in their squares, and Yeti proceeds to fix Petunia.
How very kind of them.
I know, it's just the kind of guys they are. It's that Alaskan spirit.
Yeah. Here you go. Let me give you the tip to your weapon back. There you go.
Let me just press it back into place. Let me just unbanana your weapon. Unbanana is not a particularly recognised term, I feel.
No, but it's one that I shall use from now on.
We'll add it to the little glossary of terms that we need to start creating on the website.
So, I mean, Petunia wasn't really given a chance in this fight. I don't really know what else there is to say about it.
There's not much. Petunia is now probably not making the final 16.
Yeah.
Which means we're once again not going to have a Crusher anywhere near the final.
Disappointing.
Someone just needs to build a good Crusher. That's what we need right now. We need a properly top-tier Crusher.
Like Spectre.
Exactly, yeah. Although, you know what? I was impressed by Spectre. I really was. But after watching This Is Fighting Robots and seeing how easily they got dominated by a couple of machines, I do wonder if maybe the field and their draw made them look a bit better than they were. And that pains me.
It's not possible.
In this world of sort of Swiss Army bots where everyone's got an armor configuration for everyone, I do wonder how effective a robot like that can truly be.
A man can dream.
I dream of a tournament where you enter a robot and don't get to modify it. That's what I dream of.
I dream of a tournament consisting entirely of clusterbots.
Proper ones, not those fake ones.
No, none of this entering three smaller robots rubbish. I'm talking Red Devil style clusterbots.
To be fair, I think that entering three separate robots should be allowed as long as the name implies there's four of them. For maximum confusion.
The perfect strategy.
But I'm sure that your world, where people just loosely tie their robots together at the start of the fight, I'm sure that'll be much better.
No. I mean, loosely tying your robots together at the start is the bare minimum that is required for a proper clusterbot.
Yes, and if there's one thing we know, it's that people will stretch the rules as far as possible. Therefore, all you will see is that bare minimum.
Look, as long as the Tornado team don't enter a robot, I think we'll be fine.
Well, we're going to be getting back to that later as well, so let's move on, shall we?
We've got Monsoon versus Axe Backwards.
It's hard not to be a little bit biased here, but this was just basically a lamb to the slaughter.
Yeah, I mean, Axe Backwards, they did really well. Can't even do that seriously. They just got destroyed.
You look at this, and it's hard to see how they even have a chance. And that isn't saying that Axe Backwards is a poor robot by any means. It's just that this, as a matchup, has them so comprehensively beaten 99% of the time. So a vertical bar or disc will usually beat a drum. And in this case, this particular vertical bar, being one of the bigger vertical bars out there, they've got such a reach advantage that it's really hard to see how Axe Backwards is going to get a hit on anything important. And Axe Backwards is probably the best full-body spinner that it can be, but it just doesn't have a way of really hurting Monsoon unless Monsoon voluntarily reverses into it.
Yeah, that seems unlikely. And I think Axe Backwards, it's almost inevitable that they're going to get their wheels hit as well. So, just, not a good matchup for them at all.
And it was really a single hit to a wheel, and that was it. And then a couple more for fun.
Yeah.
But I feel like Monsoon earned this draw by having to take on Son of Waiachi. which again is a robot for which there's no real strategy apart from being a wedge.
You can't be a wedge, though.
You can be a wedge with a weapon stuck on it.
What is the smallest spinner you could put on there and still have it? Well, the smallest weapon, I guess. The smallest weapon. I just think a spinner would be really funny. Just have like a tiny little thing that can tickle a robot.
No, a tiny hammer is way funnier.
Tiny hammer. Yeah, you're right. That is
Just a little
funny.
plastic hammer.
So, what is the smallest and lightest weapon you can have on your robot that still counts as an active weapon?
I haven't got the rules in front of me, but I seem to recall there is a clause in them saying that the weapon has to be capable of causing damage to an opponent or otherwise altering the way they function, i.e. a lifter or flipper. So it's basically a clause that is there to let them reject things that they think are taking the mick a little bit too much, which is the kind of clause I like.
Yeah, okay,
The
well, so...
don't be a dick rule.
So obviously that rules out having like a feather duster or something, but like how far
That's
could you
static
push it?
build up.
How far could you push it before the organisers are like, no, you're having a laugh, get out? I wonder. I guess the data point we've got is to find the robot that has the lightest weapon or the smallest weapon.
But again, different types of weapon have different weights. You know, flippers weigh less than spinners. Actually, they might not. Huh.
Maybe weight isn't the best way to measure it, but you know, just sort of the I think this is one of those human intuition things where what robot currently has the smallest weapon, where smallest is whatever is required.
I mean, the worst excuse for a weapon that I can remember was in the first series of King of Bots. I think it was a South Korean entry that basically had this weird little chainsaw running around the edge of it.
Oh yeah.
That to me is the most pitiful weapon I can imagine. That or Frostbite Spinner. Those are the two most pathetic excuses for weapons that I can recall. I would say closely followed by Miss Nightshade, but technically that robot was almost all weapon.
Almost all weapon and still useless.
I mean, it didn't help that one of the motors was broken by the time it got into the arena.
Oh dear.
It's an interesting question, it really is. I'd say, as a rule of thumb, if a robot comes in as a heavyweight with a weapon that wouldn't be effective on, say, a featherweight, you've got a problem.
Yeah.
I think you have to be able to expect a certain degree of scaling. So if the drive and armour and everything else scales well from a lighter weight class, if the weapon isn't scaling with it, that's where you go, yeah, they're kind of pushing the boundaries here.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
I love how we're having this conversation based on a fight with axe backwards, which is literally all weapon.
Yes, with with two very big weapons. But there you go.
Yeah, I think we'll probably end up coming back to this one, you know. That's a very good question that needs more thought on my part.
I look forward to it.
As a closing statement on this fight, though, I was both entertained and saddened by the very clear effort from the driver of Axe Backwards to not look as disappointed as he was. Yeah, he was kind of trying to hide that disappointment behind being hyper energetic, and yeah, I felt for him in that moment because he's built something that is really cool and barely had a chance to show it off.
Yeah.
They've been given some pretty nasty matchups.
Yeah, it's a shame. Maybe next series, if there is a next one.
There has to be, surely. Famous last words there.
We said that about Robot Wars, given the ridiculous finale they had, and yet here we are.
But that was at the 3 series point, not the 1 series point.
That's true.
Anyway, that's a depressing thing to talk about, so let's move on. Warhead versus Warrior Dragon.
Yeah, Warhead's using their disc for the first time this time.
And last time.
And the last time, yeah, I doubt they've got a second one of those.
Maybe they'll like glue it back together, I don't know.
I also enjoyed the clattish British argy bargy at the beginning of this.
Yes. I wonder how well that phrase translated.
Yeah, I want to know how many Americans even know what that means.
I mean, they know now.
They do know now. I think it's interesting to hear, because I think this is the second time they've sort of like, that team have talked about they don't want to just dominate a fight. I don't think, I'm not entirely convinced that Warhead could dominate many fights. But
complete control.
It's just interesting that they actively don't want to, though. So yeah, it's interesting to hear, I thought.
I mean, they are there for the show, and that shows in the kind of robot they've taken with them.
Yeah.
You know, it is not an optimized competitive design. It is a beautiful looking thing that also happens to work pretty well. And I think that ethos was really demonstrated by the way they reacted to the weapon breaking, which was just run it more.
I still think that's a bad idea.
It was an entertaining idea, though.
I mean, I think it was less egregious to me in this one than when Valkyrie did it.
Well, yeah, because this isn't directly under your body.
Yeah, and I think they were a little bit more careful with it. I don't think they tried to spin it up quite as much. I think they did sort of turn it off to sort of try and position their robot a little bit, and then get it going again.
Yeah, they basically used it like an axe, didn't they?
Yeah, tried to sort of use it a bit more like that.
Warrior Dragon, of course, is among the most unreliable robots out there. I don't think we've ever seen its weapon last for more than about 45 seconds to a minute.
I mean, did it even spin at all in this fight?
I think it must have, but not for long.
I just don't understand that robot.
And I think they've barely been mobile for a lot of the fight as well. There were long periods of them just sitting still, moving a couple of meters and sitting still again.
Yeah.
Which
just
brings
not
me
a great robot.
And that will brings me to the question, how is this a split decision? just how?
I think the spectacle of Warhead having its weapons split in two is maybe what did it. But I mean, not that that's necessarily correct, but I think that's probably what the thing was, that Warhead took a lot of damage, admittedly, from itself.
Thing is, you can't score points by your opponent being damaged. You score points by damaging your opponent. And even if you assume that Warrior Dragons somehow did that damage, they've still lost this fight by a long way.
Well, I think that's interesting, though, isn't it? Because I think there's a couple of times where there's fights where where a human intuition says, "Oh, this robot's won," but then if you were to break it down and build up a score properly, it points towards the other robot.
This isn't one of those cases. I mean, aggression, they basically can't show it because they haven't used their weapon once. Control, most of the time they're not even moving. I don't know how you score control points while stationary. Strategy, they didn't have one. Their strategy was keep moving once every 10 seconds or so to not be counted out. And I don't want to beat a dead horse here.
Oh, no.
But the two Roboteers have got this right and the one non-Roboteer has got it wrong. Although that said, I want Naomi Kyle to make as many bad decisions as possible, because every bad decision she makes the argument that she is biased more and more ridiculous, because it's more and more data points just saying, actually, she might not be a particularly experienced judge. Maybe people can just make mistakes without having bad motives. Never attribute to malice what can be attributed to incompetence.
Exactly.
Anyway, that's moan number 1 over. On to moan number 2, Bronco versus Sawblaze. It's very appropriate that we have this after the Razor team, but this, to me, is the closest we've got to Tornado Cage in BattleBots.
They had a lot of extra armour.
That is essentially a different robot at that point.
How much does their robot weigh, and why is it they've got a spare weight for doing that?
Well, basically, they made a very intentional design choice to lighten up the very core of the robot. So, for example, they've gone from 6-wheel drive down to 4 to give themselves as much flexibility as possible in different armour configurations. So I don't know how much the main thing weighs, but they have a lot left over that they can redistribute however they want to.
Yeah.
Kind of like when F1 teams pick the lightest driver possible so they can place more ballast where they want it.
Do you reckon all that armour is necessary against Sawblaze?
I mean, in this case, it wasn't.
It seemed like an odd thing to do.
I mean, it makes sense. In a sense, it's actually respecting your opponent to put armour in the places that you think they're going to damage you. Because realistically, Sawblaze was always going to struggle to do damage here because they need to control a robot to hurt it. And this is a robot that could just jump out of your control. So I think Bronco were in very little danger anyway. So I kind of like that they haven't been complacent and they've done everything they can to protect themselves anyway. So in that respect, it's a really respectful thing to do. But once again, I do think this is at the very edge of acceptability in terms of altering your robot.
Yeah. I don't understand why they've done it in this fight, and I don't understand why they don't do it in every fight.
They do.
I know, but like to this level.
So for countering verticals, they've got the sort of skis either side. For countering horizontals, they've got a really sturdy front and back wedge. And for overhead weapons, so axes, hammers, potentially Crushers, I suppose, and Saws, they've got this overhead configuration.
Yeah, I've forgotten about their wedge stuff for the horizontal spinners, actually, yeah.
I think they probably have a little flipper extension as well for big horizontals that they want to get right under.
Yeah. And possibly also a big cage with a tiny little spinner attached to it.
Oh yeah, that's really the first choice for Crushers, of course.
Maybe if Bronco fight Petunia, we'll see it.
Again, it's something that I know is within the rules. I imagine they have had it all pre-approved. It doesn't seem that any of the builders have a problem with it. It just goes against my idea of what this should be. That said, I still love Bronco because it's a really effective flipper, and BattleBots needs more of those.
Yeah, it did. It did a lot of flipping in this fight as well, and sort of really showed its power, I guess, by flipping Sawblaze with enough power into like the arena walls that sort of that properly sort of do damage to them as well. Like, I think to actually lift a robot, like a big heavyweight robot, and then throw it into a wall with enough power to, dent it and mark it all up like that. That's quite cool.
That was the most alpha move imaginable. Just throw a robot at its own driver.
Yeah, straight in front of the control box as well. Yeah, it's like bang.
But then Jameson Go, I mean, he doesn't need to win a giant nut because he's already got 2 of them. He did not flinch at all. He was so focused that did not bother him. Every other member of his team has run away. He hasn't even blinked.
Was that a fly in the corner of my eye there?
Just incredible focus, and I suppose adrenaline is a hell of a drug.
Do you reckon Sawblaze could have? Because there were a couple of times where it was upside down, and it didn't look like it was immediately being able to right itself, and then Bronco would come in and flip it again, so it was rendered a bit moot. Do you think Sawblaze? I mean, I sort of feel like it should be able to, with its big arm, self-right itself from like when the arm is like closed, it self-rights quite easily. But I think when it's sort of like face down and open, like as long as it can be, do you reckon it can right from that position?
It looked to me as though the very first engagement broke the arm mechanism, because they sort of reversed into Bronco, got a few sparks with the saw, and then I think Bronco kind of flipped the saw arm, and I'm guessing that broke it, because after that they were constantly wheeling right up when they drove, which if the arm was working properly it would prevent. So I don't think it's that the arm can't self-right them, it's just that the arm was already broken.
Fair enough.
I would imagine it'd be a massive design flaw to make a robot like that and not make it able to self-right from certain positions.
What, like Bombshell, for example?
Yeah, weirdly. Although this is a robot that's in its second series of competing, so you'd sort of doubly expect it to be okay.
Yeah, that's true.
What an impact like that is going to do is immediately render the saw useless, because it's not the sort of thing that's designed to be landed on.
Yeah, I mean, you could see the blade was bent after a couple of hits, really. I never really got a chance to use it.
Mm. And after that, fair play in terms of still controlling part of the fight just by being a decent wedge with decent drive power. They've managed to jam the forks in. The forks were all bent up by that impact with the wall. Still managed to jam those in and push Bronco around a bit, but they really had no legitimate threat.
Yeah, that was all Broncos, really, wasn't it?
I'm wondering if there was potentially an unstick that was edited around in the middle of this fight. Because there was a long period where Sawblaze was kind of jammed onto Bronco's front. They sort of had the forks running under that top armour. And it seemed quite clear to me that the Bronco team were choosing not to use the flipper, because that's quite a big risk, really. If you've got what is essentially a restraining bar running across your weapon and you fire it, you could be doing a lot of damage to yourself.
They did fire it in the end, though.
Yeah, there was a cut. A really awkward cut that kind of crossed the line, which I'm hoping is a phrase you're familiar with.
I think so, but best explain it anyway.
Yeah, so generally speaking, when you edit anything together, you try not to go from an angle that is on one side of the action to an angle that is almost directly opposite. Because then left becomes right, right becomes left, it's confusing for a viewer. You tend to sort of, if you have cameras around a 360 or something, you tend to sort of almost work around as best you can. There are exceptions to that rule. Tight close-ups in particular are a big exception. If you're watching a football match where you've got most of the action coming from a very specific angle, if they want to cut to a close-up of a player's face, they don't care where that comes from, because there's no context clues anyway. Whereas in this, it felt like a really awkward cut to the other side of the arena, where suddenly they do seem a little bit more free. And Bronco is happy to use that flip. And it feels like that jarring cut would be a really good way to sort of cover the sins of the robots having been moved very slightly. It could be that I'm hearing hooves and shouting zebras. It could be that it's nothing at all, but that just jumped out at me a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny because I think when I was watching it, I didn't notice anything wrong about that, but like I can visualize exactly the cut you're talking about. So I think evidently some part of it had stuck out a little bit for me as well.
And they must be editing around these kind of things because we haven't seen any in all 3 series. But if you watch any live event, you're going to get one a day or at least one a weekend. They happen quite a lot.
Yeah.
So they are clearly editing around them.
Well, I think that seems reasonable. They've got no other way of dealing with it, and it's probably, I don't know, like, would you rather they showed it?
I will always advocate for showing that kind of thing because it helps explain a rule. I'm generally against hiding things like that because I think it can come off as dishonest. But I feel like most people would disagree with me on that and would rather not have the action broken up like that. I feel like I'm in a big minority by wanting that.
I suspect it's edited around for pacing more than anything else.
Yeah, exactly. It would be a big disruption. Yes, especially when you get fights that get unstuck twice, which does happen occasionally. That would really mess up the flow of a TV programme. Especially one that's got to be tightly edited into a 42-minute slot. So yeah, I understand why they do it. I just don't love it. But that's me being super anal.
It's not like you at all.
No, it's not. Should we finish on something more whimsical, though?
I think so.
The words "holy bucking bronco" required whatever the auditory version of a double take is.
Yes, I did have a moment of like, what did he just say?
Again, potentially a little bit of overdubbing there.
Potentially, yeah.
I would love to think that at a couple of points that has happened to commentators. Just being drawn into swearing and having to cut it out.
So we're done.
Yeah, we're so done.
You can find the show notes for this episode at spinnerproof.com/episode/37. And there you can find links to all the robots we've been talking about today. And you can also find a link to our Twitter at Spinnerproof, where you can tweet to us the fight that you would show someone who'd never seen combat robotics before.